that sorted. Yeah, so good evening by now, everyone. My name is Nozizwe Dube, and I am the coordinator of Undivided for KU Leuven. So I want to thank you everyone for being here tonight. Thank you all for showing interest in everything that we're doing with the launch of our manifesto. We've been working on it for quite a while now, as you might have seen. Normally, if you are here, then you have received an email with the Zoom link to be here tonight. So you do also you also should have received the text of the manifesto in your emails as well. And you can also, we also gave you access to like the link for our blog, where you can also read it there as well and download it there as well. But I wanted to just definitely take this time to thank you all for following us and definitely showing interest in everything that we're doing, because we have been working on decolonization for the last 3 years. And as you also saw, we were very much inspired by the Rhodes Must Fall movement in South Africa, specifically at the University of Cape Town, that happened in 2015. So yeah, we're a bit, obviously a lot later, but nonetheless, it's still a very important subject also at this very specific moment in time. So we're all very happy that it's also generating a lot of interest here at KU Leuven and in Belgium in general as well. So we have our event tonight is organized in the following way. So we're starting off with a keynote from Tunde Adefiore. He's going to be giving us a keynote on, basically, I think he's really going to look at decolonization, but specifically from an arts perspective. So Tunde, he, as you may have all seen, I'm sorry, I'm just getting a couple of questions, so that's why I'm kind of stopping now. But yeah, let me just clear that out. So we are recording this, and normally we will be posting this up on our YouTube channel, the Undivided for KU Leuven YouTube channel, afterwards. So normally everything should come online, of course, if everything is okay, because we are actively recording this right now. So that should not be a problem. Also, the text of the manifesto, as I said, all of you should have received it by now in your email. If you got the Zoom link, then you should have also got a PDF attachment of the manifesto itself, or a link to our blog with, where you can also read the manifesto and download it as well. So I hope that is cleared out for everyone. But as I was saying, we're going to start off with our keynote speaker. After our the keynote speaker is Tunde Adefiore. He recently wrote a very, very striking contribution in the book Migration, Racism, I think it was Migration, Racism and Equality at VUB. He wrote a very striking opinion about the whole importance of ethnic studies and also archiving as sort of tools of liberation within academia. And I thought that would be very, very interesting to have someone who can speak from a sort of arts perspective on how you can decolonize specifically within the arts realm of academia, because as Undivided, we do usually get the question how you can decolonize specific disciplines within academia. So I thought it would be interesting to have that as well. He's going to have he has a PowerPoint, which he's going to be sharing soon. He'll share the screen soon after I've done speaking. And he also definitely encourages everyone. It's a very interactive type of PowerPoint. So he definitely wants to encourage everyone to be interactive. You can write things in the chat. You can send it to me directly. You can send it to him directly. You can put it in the general chat. And I guess you may also, I guess you will also accept people who want to just put their, if you want to put your audio on as well, I think that will be okay when he asks the questions, of course. So I definitely want to encourage everyone to be as interactive as possible if you feel like it. After Tunde has done his keynote, we will then go on to have a short, I'll try to explain all of our 10 demands as short as possible. I'm not going to take too long, but just so that everyone has a general idea of why we wrote specific demands and what we mean exactly when we're writing specific demands, what's the whole backstory behind a specific demand. And then after that, we'll start with the panel discussion that will be moderated by Nyanchama Kemwa, but I'll also give an introduction to all of the panel speakers later on. But I don't want to take too much time now from Tunde, so I'm going to give him the floor so that he can start his interactive keynote. Thank you.
Thank you, Nozizwe. Let me just, here we are. So I'm going to need your help with this. Today was actually the first day of the trials of the man who killed George Floyd in the US. I thought it was necessary, considering where I'm speaking, to just do a small invocation. So I need you all to turn on your microphone, please, and just, help me in saying these names, right? Sandadia, say his name.
Sandadia.
Sandadia.
Sandadia, say his name.
Sandadia.
Breonna Taylor.
Breonna Taylor.
Say her name.
Breonna Taylor.
George Floyd. Say his name.
George Floyd.
Thank you. There's of course a whole list that we can go down, but those three, of course, Sandadia, the obvious connection to KU Leuven, and George Floyd, is because today was the beginning of the trial, and Breonna Taylor as a reminder of kind of a lot of women who are also, of course, facing brutality from the police state. So, in conversation with poets and philosopher Fred Moulton, Professor Robin D.G. Kelley, author of Racial Capitalism, says, the university is an anti-intellectual space. So my question to you all is, what could he possibly have meant by this? What did Professor Robin D.G. Kelley mean when he said that the university is an anti-intellectual space? So this is really hoping that some of you will provide me with some possible, Anyone? So what is meant by the university being an anti-intellectual space, especially when we think about universities, right? We think, that's where all the smartest brains go. That's where intellect is built. So what could this possibly mean? Take your time, we got time, I think.
Maybe the lack of critical thinking.
Lack of critical thinking. Thank you, Lane.
Or maybe the emphasis on top-down learning. So measuring learning as your absorption of things that teachers give you, as opposed to creating your own intellectual world.
You said absorption.
Absorption, yeah, maybe.
Yeah, Tunde, there are a couple of responses coming in via the chat, so maybe I can tell you about that. I can read them to you as well.
Thank you.
So one person said, maybe because it focuses on funding research that makes money instead of just merely focusing on intellectual pursuit.
Thank you for that. Research, focus on funding research that makes money.
And then there's another one as well that also just came in, more committed to the reproduction of knowledge.
more committed to the reproduction of knowledge.
Yeah.
Mm.
And
Okay.
another one as well that just got in, universities focus on replicating existing knowledge within the same colonial framework.
Thank you for that. I'll take one last one if anyone wants to give, because these are really good, right? You know, this idea that, you know, this emphasis on top-down learning, the sometimes lack of critical thinking that is sometimes in certain fields more than others, of course, and it of course varies based on professors and lecturers, the lack of critical thinking, a focus on funding research that makes money, meaning then that you have research being done for fighting wars, right? You know, in places like Harvard or MIT, you know, that get a lot of money from Department of Defense in the US. And of course, you know, this whole idea of being more committed to the sort of reproduction of the same type of knowledge, right? And then this replicating of existing knowledge within this colonial framework. Is there anyone that has one last one that we might be actually missing that I'm surprised that no one has said?
There are two more that came in the chat.
Okay.
Exploiting research for personal interests and internal agendas instead of creating a healthy research environment for everyone. And then there's also competitive grading ranking that came in.
I love that one. So instead of a healthy research for every healthy research environment. And then the last one was competitive.
Grading and ranking, as in like that's all that universities really care about these days. It's about what number you are on the ranking, and it's more, very liberalized in that sense. Yeah.
So you said very liberal in that sense.
Yeah, I guess very to the capitalistic type of thing that it's like running a it's like running a business and not really necessarily about educating people. I think that's what they're saying.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, thank you for those actually. The one that I was hoping to hear, I still haven't heard it, but maybe we'll have to come back to this and then we'll see if we can come up with that one once I'm further on in this small little presentation. So with that, now I'm actually yet another exercise, like Nozizwe promised you all. I actually, what maybe I should say is that I sort of, maybe I'm a lecturer or something at, I don't know if I am, but you know, I do a little something at St. Lucas, Antwerp. And one of the things that you know, the interaction is a super crucial part of kind of how I learn and also hopefully how we exchange knowledge. But anyways, what I wanted to know next is for those who know, those who think they know, and those who might want to guess, what are the differences between decolonizing, or what is the difference between decolonizing the university and creating anti-colonial spaces? So we'll do that again. Oh, sorry. So I'll repeat the question again. What is the difference between decolonizing the university and creating anti-colonial spaces? Take your time.
I think, if I may, I think I see if you're trying to say, for example, what we say, sort of like decolonize KU Leuven, we're really starting off from a white default in essence, and you're trying to then decolonize it. So you're in essence already starting from the white default, which is you can argue very problematic. But then in contrast to that, you can speak of anti-colonial, and I feel that starts more from a Black people's and people of color's perspective, and so therefore you're much further from the white default, and you're starting from there. And I think that's a very different. Yeah, it's just, in essence, it's very different. That's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. Very different, right? It's not just a question of perspective. It's not just a question of framing. It's also, where you start is also very much a question of power, right? Thank you for that. Anyone else had some thoughts on that? This was actually a really good start. This is pretty much the answer, but if anyone wanted to add to that, anyone?
Maybe how when you decolonize the university, you're talking about for example, in the manifesto, we talk about the books in the library, the policies, it's all the institutional things. Whereas when you create an anti-colonial space, that's sort of opening it up to the interpersonal interactions between people. And
what do you mean by that?
I'm focusing on the word space, which I'm thinking of as a literal space where people can come together and interact with each other, as opposed to a more abstract space like the university where it's more of an institution.
Yeah. So then, thank you for that, Nicola. And then, so if you take what you just said about the interaction between people, this takes us back to this first set of questions about the anti-intellectual, right? That when we think about decolonizing spaces as opposed to anti-colonial spaces, we have to remember, and that was what kind of surprised me. Let me just go back to it. Sorry, I normally use Teams, and Teams is kind of janky, and I'm used to the jankiness of Teams, but now I'm like, I have to, yeah, okay, that'll work. So one thing that surprised me when we were talking about this anti-intellectual thing that Professor Robin D.G. Kelly from UCLA talks about or mentioned, is that no one mentioned people outside of the universities. People outside of the universities that are creating, intellectual theory every single day. Like the folks who are standing at your, at the Friday market, and I guess that's Laduza Plain or something, the people who are cutting hair, close to Brusselsstraat in Leuven, or if you go to Brussels, the people that are working at the meat close to Anderlecht, right? The abattoir. These individuals, the folks who are, selling clothes or cutting hair, especially, I talked about this last week or the week before, especially the people who are doing and braiding hair. They are people. They are creating theory like nobody's business. So this was not supposed to be part of the speech. Geez, that's what happens when I get all interactive. I kind of start going places. But there's a book, let's see, Don't Touch My Hair by Emma Dabiri. I talked about this last week in another context. If you want to see, go read the last chapter of Don't Touch My Hair by the Nigerian Irish writer and thinker Emma Dabiri, where she talks about how in braiding hair, there's actually been studies by mathematicians that show kind of like the Fibonacci series in that braiding of hair, right? So anyways, people, that's maybe what surprised me in terms of receiving these questions, receiving these responses, is that No one mentioned the theory that is being created on a daily basis outside of the university walls, right? In unexpected places, places that we should actually look more into in order to broaden our understanding of ourselves and what we think we know, right? We're so used to, I mean, that's part of the colonization, right? In our researching, we're so used to studying the other still, right? We're still used to studying the other without really creating the space for understanding, really truly making space for the understanding and hearing, right? Especially the hearing of the other. Is that clear for everybody? Are there questions about that? I saw somebody put something in the chat. Nozizwe, can you check that for me? I don't know what was.
Yes, it was about when you were asking about the difference between decolonization and anti-colonization, and two people put in some responses. So someone said, I would say that anti-colonization is the action or space of resistance, whereas decolonizing the university is the end goal or the ideal.
Okay. Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, and then there was also someone who then said anti, so is it also about creating new knowledge institutions? And that was the last thing in the chat.
Exactly. So it answers in a way to kind of what I was saying about individuals outside. So about creating new knowledge. What was the last part of that? Sorry, new knowledge.
Institutions.
Institutions. Okay. Potentially, let's say potentially. I mean, these are two very interesting. I mean, you know, there's only four, but very, you know, interesting kind of points. Especially, you know, this idea of, you know, that Nazizwe mentioned about, you know, where we start from. Are we starting from the white default? Are we starting something I'm going to talk about tomorrow when I have to speak to all these white men again? But that's a whole nother question. You don't have to bother yourself about that. But what happens when we start from this white default, this kind of proximity to whiteness and this proximity to power that we all, myself included, play to, right? I can't help but think about, I don't have the book there, but I can't help but think about Professor Zakiya Jackson, who I had the honor of interviewing yesterday, who says that actually, when you look at it, Blackness, right? Blackness is necessary to prop up whiteness, right? So I'm gonna let y'all think about that. It's not mine, but if you get a chance, check out Professor Zakiya Iman Jackson's book, Becoming Human. It's so rich and dense and it just kind of, for me, and I think for a lot of other people, flips the way we see ourselves and we understand our Blackness, we understand our humanity. Professor Jackson really dives into kind of this understanding of speciesism and also post-humanist thinking, including a critique of some of your favorites, you know. Anyways, yet I digress. Okay, that was not the point. So let me go back to so I can stay on point, otherwise we'll be here for an hour and that's not the point. I won't do any more activities, okay? So this is the last interaction that we'll have. But like Nozizwe said earlier, if anyone has questions in between, please say it out loud, just stop me, because I'm all about being stopped and being questioned and being challenged, or put it in the chat box if you're not comfortable with speaking it out loud. So these are some of the ideas about decolonization and the differences between, or maybe the liminal space where they meet between decolonization and anti-colonization. When I think of decolonization these days, besides thinking about Frantz Fanon, Fatima Mernissi, Sylvia Wynter, and others, I of course think about Professor Gloria Wekker. Why do I think of Professor Wekker? Because she has epitomized creation of anti-colonial spaces for a long time. when in the 80s, she heard of and studied Audre Lorde, she wrote a letter to Lorde to come meet with her and her lesbian allies in Amsterdam. This was, I believe, when Weckert was still was still working for the city of Amsterdam, long before she went to do her PhD research in California, long before she became professor at Utrecht and later headed the Department of Gender Studies, of course, before she wrote her prize-winning book in English. This was back when she was a superfan who was also trying to root real critical changes in the anti-Black and colonial Amsterdam, if not Dutch, landscape. You can imagine how surprised she was when Lorde wrote back and accepted their invitation. Lorde spent time in Amsterdam, and that initiated an archive dedicated to the work and life of Audre Lorde. The creation of this archive would be one of many anti-colonial acts Wecker would take. In essence, saying no one else, quote unquote, no one else in Holland will archive the work and life of this important poet, feminist, philosopher, future convener, so we will. Archiving allows us to not only create trails and record our stories the way we see fit, but it also gives a foundation, thus, in essence, giving voice for future generations to amplify from. More on archives later. One last small question, okay. Anyone know, by any chance, what another anti-colonial endeavor Wecker undertook around 2016 or so? I already kind of mentioned it. Anyone? What could one consider sort of, not completely, but sort of an anti-colonial endeavor that Wecker undertook around 2016? Somebody put something in the chat.
Yeah, someone put, they wrote the diversity report at the UvA.
Oh yeah, that too. But that's true, but I don't know. But okay, yeah, okay. So that wasn't the one I was maybe looking for. Maybe for the person who wrote that, if you don't mind, that diversity report. Why would you call that a decolonial act as opposed? I'm sorry. Why would you call that an anti-colonial act as opposed to a decolonial act? Not for now, don't answer it now, but please do answer it because I think it's really important for this discussion. It's super important for this discussion, you know. So thank you for mentioning that. But I was trying to get at a very small point actually. So what did Wecker do around this time in addition to writing that report? Anyone else? I already alluded to it.
She wrote a book about whiteness.
Yeah. Yes. Who's that? Who? I can't see you.
Okay, my video is off.
Oh, okay. So it's fine. It's fine. I just couldn't. Yeah. So she wrote the book. Thank you for that. So then we move on. But besides writing the book, indeed, White Innocence: Paradoxes of Colonialism and Race, besides the fact that it was monumental, additionally, she wrote it and published it in English. That's what I kind of consider an anti-colonial act. Bear with me. I know some of you are already laughing like, huh, yeah, you mean the new imperialists? No, wait. So not that English is not the Queen's language. And of course, Meghan Markle has bravely reminded us how racist they all are in case we forgot their bloody colonial conquest. But the fact that Wecker knew that if the book was published in Dutch, right, it would not get the kind of attention it deserved. So that's what is the anti-colonial act. This understanding that I'm going to play, you know, I don't know if y'all understand the terminology play. I'm going to play the colonial masters, not, oh, sorry, I can't explain what, I can't explain what getting played is. So for those who understand what play is not play which in how you think it. But basically what she says is that, you know, like I'm gonna do something that people aren't expecting which became a really anti-colonial act, with this understanding that these Dutch folks, they're not trying to hear what I'm trying to say. I live in Holland, but they're not trying to hear what I'm trying to say. So I'm gonna take this somewhere else, right? I'm gonna publish it in English because I know, you know, how much people are gonna pay attention, right? So instead, she had it published by Duke University Press, still using the master's tools, of course, for the gain of the movement. As promised earlier, more on archives, and that's the White Innocence book there. What is clear is that spaces like the African Museum, quote unquote, in Tervuren are not sufficient nor safe spaces for all, especially not for many people of color who want to participate in the act of memorialization. It might be a beginning for some, but others have shown their disdain. This is, in essence, what the so-called Africa Museum is: a place of forgetting, a place akin to Disneyland. That part, a place akin to Disneyland, is actually from Saidiya Hartman's book, Lose Your Mother. So a place akin to Disneyland where families can walk through spaces that present very colonized perspectives on what people and a place are. In a capitalist, imperialist, and colonizing country such as Belgium, such spaces have the right to exist, of course, but the budget they have should be cut tremendously. Most important in cutting that budget would be the redistribution of the resources to initiatives and individuals who are active in archiving the realities of people of color in Belgium. To name just a few, think of Black History Month, Belgium, Muslim with a V, Unie van Turksvereniging. The other part of the budget gleaned from the Africa Museum could be used to introduce an ethnic studies degree course into at least one university. In other words, I'll come back to that whole ethnic studies thing later when I'm done, okay? In other words, while we still have a lot of decolonizing to do, how do institutions like Bazaar, African Museum, the Catholic Church, yes, the Catholic Church, and universities like KU Leuven support those who are trying to explode systems? Yes, explode systems, like blow them up. Bureaucracies, explode bureaucracies and institutions that we are all too comfortable with, so that we can see the horizon of new possibilities and make room for other types of explorations that does depart from the deeply racist, hegemonic, sexist, ableist, homophobic, and violent narrative that this very university, KU Leuven and others, was built on. So exploding so that we can see the horizon is taken from, you know, Fred Moten and Stefano Harvey's really seminal work, The Undercommons, right? FYI, we can call it defunding, or we can call it reparations, whatever floats your boat. Even a deeply problematic behemoth like the Catholic Church has gotten the picture and has given reparations, right, to those that it enslaved. Well, it's planning to give, I think the figure was like 10 million or so. This was like reported 2 weeks ago. For a structure such as KU Leuven that was gifted a whole new library after World War II by US allies, KU Leuven should know just how crucial it is to give some of your own resources in order for others to make space for new meaning making, to kind of riff off of what Gloria Wecker would say. New meaning making without the gaze and breath of the empire breathing down your neck. This is crucial because, as Professor Wecker's comrade Audre Lorde reminds us, it is our visions which sustain us. They point the way toward a future made possible by our belief in them. There is a world in which we all wish to live. That world is not attained lightly. We call it future. If we do not begin talking, thinking, feeling ourselves for its shape, we will condemn ourselves and our children to a repetition of corruption and error. Imagine that as KU Leuven continues its conquest to colonize Kortrijk, Brussels, and the Odyssey and so on, that it gives spaces, maybe in some far corner of Antwerp, for new experiments in meaning making. That instead of just supporting an archive like KADOK, that it also supports initiatives like Black Speaks Back, Black History Month, Café Congo, and others, without doing what white organizations and institutions still feel the need to do, quote unquote, uppicker. This is something I heard just a few weeks ago. A library, I won't name where, a library wanted to uppick ideas, right? Anyways, and institutions still feel the need to do uppicker and get their draws all up in a bunch about, quote unquote, how will this benefit this great institution? To badly paraphrase John F. Kennedy, ask not how oppressed and marginalized people will continue to prop up and benefit whiteness and colonial institutions, but instead ask how you, as powerful organ, will redistribute your power, foster the creation of spaces without meddling in their mission and vision. My invocation of Dia's name is not done lightly. The racism runs deep in this institution. As y'all have heard many times, Sanders' murder was just a reflection of the resurgent supremacist and hegemonic thinking we see fueling societies from Uganda to the Philippines, from Hungary to the US, and right back to Belgium. Often, sociologists and anthropologists say, we have increases in supremacist thinking when we start to feel threatened as a society. Someone is feeling a threat. And I assure you, it should not be Orban in Budapest or De Wever in Antwerp. Instead, those who are really under threat are those who are facing the impact of environmental racism in hoods like Kiel in Antwerp and Anderlecht in Brussels. Those who, due to the pandemic, are facing increased health risk, not only from the COVID itself, but from the mental health crisis and lack of access to proper education because their parents can't afford to provide a stable internet access. I know more attention is getting paid to the mental health crisis among school children. The Standards reported as much just a few weeks back. But how many of us were paying attention when Out de Marge Visitway released a report in the summer of 2020 that underlined the poverty and mental health crisis facing many families of color in places like Molenbeek, in Brussels, and in Kiel? What role can a decolonizing, potentially anti-racist university, we're still far from that, of course, potentially anti-racist university like KU Leuven do to assist in making sure that it takes up its role as a university to be a place that all members of society can find a safe haven, right? Is it, for example, too much to ask the university to think about opening some of its unused dorms for housing families who might not have proper or healthy housing situations, which of course continues to fuel the resurgence of the COVID infection, which in turn continues to keep all of us in lockdown. Is it too much to ask a university that continues to get richer due to all the spin-offs being generated in places like Edinburgh, as was alluded to earlier, to provide students living below the poverty line free access to stable internet? No, I'm not talking about the students enrolled at the university, but I'm pointing to some of those living near the Brill Park in Leuven or in the Casablanca neighborhood in Kesselo. It will take some logistical work, but that is how anti-colonial and anti-racist thinking works. To think about the potential to make a difference outside of the confines of our colonial structures, to see how we can undermine colonial bureaucracies in order to assist those who are descended from a generation of people that have been stifled by colonial bureaucracies to flourish and build new potential. Can a university like KU Leuven forego its desires to continue to reach for neoliberal fantasies of orgies and instead redistribute some of its resources to serve communities outside of its walls? The communities where many still don't attend the university in Leuven because it is too isolating and racist of a place. It is not lost on me that the white boys who aided and abetted in the death of Sendadia are no longer able to register at KU Leuven. But my question to KU Leuven is that the solution? Really? An abolitionist at heart who believes deeply in transformation, I don't think that punitive action is the solution, or any punitive action for that matter. Instead, what if administrators focus their attention on the type of anti-colonial and anti-racist action that would make sure there are more people of color enrolling at KU Leuven in Leuven? And I make it very specific to say Leuven and not like in Brussels or in these other offshoots, right? And actually stay and not drop out. So let me say that one more time, sorry. Instead, what if administrators focus their attention on the type of anti-colonial and anti-racist action that would make sure there are more people of color enrolling at KU Leuven, in Leuven, and actually stay and not drop out after the first year of studies? Or what if some of the resources being used for the investigation were actually used to improve the mental health of communities that reflect Dia's skin tone? Communities who are often living through, even in relatively wealthy Leuven, generations of poverty and intergenerational trauma that their parents and grandparents have encoded in their DNA and packed along with their bags when they left their home countries some many decades ago. As many of you know, decolonization, right, is a verb. But being anti-colonial, anti-racist, isn't only about putting words into action, but it is about realizing the metaphor and seeding the hyperbole of our wildest dreams of our collective sustainable futures. It is about realizing the metaphor and seeding the hyperbole of our wildest dreams of our collective sustainable futures. It is about realizing the metaphor and seeding the hyperbole of our wildest dreams of our collective sustainable futures. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very, very much, Tunde, for that amazing Keynote. And yeah, it's good that you just left your screen right there on the book. So I'm just going to explain to people. So yeah, as you can see right now on Tunde's screen, there's a book, Migration, Equality and Racism, 44 Opinions, which is a publication with, as the title suggests, 44 opinions on a various amount of topics. And it was just published not too long ago. So you can definitely also look for that on, I think the easiest way to, you can also download it, because you can download it in English and in Dutch on the website of BIRMM-VUB. So that's definitely something that I definitely do also want to encourage people to take a look at, because Tunde also has his own piece in there, which was obviously the basis of what he just, of the talk that he just gave us, the keynote he just gave us.
Yeah, can I?
Yeah, definitely.
Sorry, Noziz, I just wanted to also just say really quickly that besides my article, of course, you have the article of Sophie Wittek's, Professor Dr. Wittek's, who also writes about these kind of themes. And also, you also have Dr. Iman Leshka, who also writes about the Fatima Menisi Lear School, and Christel Samoa. So just wanted to say that.
Yeah, no, thank you. That's definitely definitely important to also give that along, because there are some very, very interesting opinions that are in there, and that will also definitely also handling and touching on some of the things that we will be discussing tonight, obviously in relation to decolonization, but just definitely a very good publication overall. I just wanted to just check now if there were firstly any questions and so forth from the attendees. I didn't, right, let me just check. Yeah, I haven't seen anything coming in the chat ever since we did the last interactive moment, but if you do have any questions or anything that you want to ask, anything of the sort, now is definitely the time. If you want to ask that, if you want to ask Tunde anything, you can just put on your mic, or you can put it in the chat. If you can type quickly, then I can read it. But yeah, we definitely, as we communicated, we're open for any questions. So looking around. Okay, it's quite still. I don't know if people are typing or if people don't want to, because I haven't seen anything coming in the chat at least.
Maybe we'll just give them some time. And also just to say, I mean, I think that the interaction was really, was really what it could have been, in terms of like, people really kind of thinking about the difference between anti-colonization and decolonial spaces. So yeah, I wonder if maybe it's just that everything has been said, but of course you have a panel, so more can be said, so.
No, but since I don't know, I might just try to sort of like fill in the time with something, and let's see if anything will, anybody will send anything. But what I definitely did find very interesting is that there were a lot of different things that you said that I had myself not thought about, in the sense of offering spaces, and in the same way, like with the analogy you gave of KU Leuven receiving, I think it was some type of support from the United States of America after the World War, and then I think it's the Central Library actually that's also like quite a lot of they got sort of like rebuilt after it was after the World Wars, and then obviously sort of like looking at KU Leuven as well and saying maybe it's your turn now to do that, but relating to Black people and people of color within Belgium itself, and also really looking at very tangible things such as homelessness, such as the lack of equal opportunities and all of those things that are within Leuven itself, and how KU Leuven, as the oldest university in Belgium, can also play a very significant role in that. But now I just see that Nyanchama raised her hand. So I'm gonna give the floor to her.
Maybe I should just address that real quick. You know, that's it, right? Is that we need to be careful that as we attend these universities, as we work for these universities, as we engage with these universities, we need to be careful that we don't allow these universities to continue to be these kind of isolated behemoths that they often are, you know, that they really take up the role of kind of societal causes, you know, and see their responsibility in this in the communities that they reside in, right? Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
All right, Tunde, inspirational as always. Thank you very much for thank you very much for your intervention. I mean, it was amazing. You brought up some really powerful stuff that we need to regurgitate. It's no wonder that we're not having questions at the moment. People need to think about it. I liked it that you made a distinct difference between the two concepts, because that is where we often go wrong, the difference between decolonizing university and creating anti-colonial spaces is so important. I liked it that you also gave some very real examples of how we can shift from that verb and shift to action and what this action can mean. Sometimes we can be myopic in our focus on the university as a university space, not knowing that the university is embedded in society and society is interaction, in conversation with the university. I really loved the various actors that you mentioned, because it's not for nothing that people say the pubist is like a therapist, or that your hairdresser is like a therapist. I mean, there are incredible conversations that go on there. And these conversations are a microcosmic reflection of the issues that we experience in society. I felt that perhaps if I can just take on your conversation a little bit further, and maybe, you know, bring up the idea on, at the moment, when we talk about decolonization, when we talk about decolonization or decolonial process in all its, you know, is pomp and glory, we are still talking about, you know, about words and terminologies that are not measurable. And I feel that, you know, and I'm wondering about you, what you feel about that. How can we make them measurable? Because it's a frustration to universities, to the lawmakers, to the policymakers, when they're confronted with all these words that they cannot measure, that they cannot articulate, they cannot translate into policy. The system just works like that. I mean, I have an idea. I mean, an idea. One of the suggestions, it is just one suggestion, is perhaps universities should be encouraged to invest in the creation of performance indicators. Performance indicators can be measurable. Performance indicators take on non-measurable, non-articulatable terminologies and events or actions, and translate them into measurable indices. And these indices can then be used into can be used to really structurally create changes, structurally impact upon. So what are your views, you know, about this?
Yeah, thank you so much. That was really rich, but you've said it all. Like, I don't think I have much more to say. I would just say that one thing that really struck to me is what you said about, you know, the role of, you know, pubs and hairdressers, you know, and you know, I mean, you know, kind of playing off of what I said earlier, I think that that's really key. And just kind of thinking about how much more we would understand about ourselves if we actually took these places much more seriously than we do. You know, and how much more we can understand of how, you know, psychology works, you know, and that's what, of course, the work that some institutions are already doing, you know. It was interesting when I saw the list, and I really appreciated the structure and the really directness of the 10 suggestions that the demands, sorry, not suggestions, demands that Undivided made. You know, they listed the different faculties and why. But one of the things that I unfortunately, I didn't get a chance, I'll be honest, I was preparing for this, so I didn't get a chance to look at it into detail. But one of the things I missed when I saw the philosophy department and I saw other departments, I missed the psychology department. Imagine what it would look like, you know, if KU Leuven's psychology department was so let's start with that. If it was decolonized, right? What type of understandings would they have if, for example, you know, and I know some people are sort of doing this work in a way at KU Leuven, but not really. But I know that, for example, at Goldsmith in the UK and also King's College, they're doing a lot of work in places like South London, looking at how, you know, communities are finding ways to heal, you know, mental trauma, right? And that's something that, if somebody please correct me if I'm wrong, somebody who knows better, that's something that I feel like when I look at the psychology department, for example, at KU Leuven, a very good one, apparently, a very respected one, that's something that's very much missing, as if there aren't people that have been bringing trauma to the nation for many generations, you know, like whether it's the first generation Moroccans who came here to work in the mines and do other things. They didn't just work in the mines, right? The traumas and the healing that, or sorry, the sort of, how do you say it? Rao process? Oh my gosh, this is horrible. How do you say it?
Mourning process.
Thank you. Oh my gosh. I don't know what's wrong with me. So thank you. So the mourning process that one has to go through to come to a new country, right? And leave your homeland behind, you know, in the 60s, the 50s, whatever, right? And of course you have the large, you know, Rwandese population here, the Burundese population here, and all the trauma that comes with that, you know, like basically that's like, just to talk about the psychology department, you know, like if the psychology department was decolonizing, they would create better tools to work with these communities, right? So just wanted to kind of touch on what you mentioned right there. But in terms of kind of, you're right? There's a lot of words, and you know, sometimes we don't feel like, especially policymakers don't feel like they have enough tools. But I think that going back to the 10 demands, right? That's what they mentioned in terms of, you know, we want to see more Black professors and folks of color being hired by the university. But it's really simple. Like, I shouldn't be talking about this, but I was at a meeting, so I won't give details, but I was just at a meeting, and you wouldn't believe how many people are against the idea of quotas. You wouldn't believe how many people are still against the idea of registering that there's this amount of Turkish people at the job. There's this amount of, you know, Congolese descended people. People are against this idea. Left-leaning progressive people are against the idea of simply recording, you know, the ethnicities of people, because they feel, oh, well, it could work against the people. No, we need to know who are in these institutions, who are in these organizations. So that's one thing that could be done, right? And quotas. I know y'all are gonna be like, oh yeah, he's from the US, so you know, he loves quotas. Well, whatever, I don't care. We need quotas here in Belgium. Anyways, sorry, I'm done.
Sorry, can I just please, Nozizwe, can I just still say something? I know
Yeah.
I know, but this is just too good. I can't leave it like this. Okay, I have 3 points for you, and I hope you can be pithy in your answer because of time. And one of them, of course, I'll just jump into the quotas. Quotas is a bad word for many people because nobody wants to be given preferential treatment. And even though we realize that there is a need to very urgently fill the gap that has been for so long been evaded, and by virtue of the institutional racism, structural racism, been a realization. There are many who say that perhaps it's in the terminology, in the phrasing of it all. People would like to be hired on the basis of their quality, their competences, their talents, their capabilities, and to be given the possibility to build up their knowledge using whatever means possible, whether it is on-the-job training, train the trainer, what do you call it, an equivalence test on their elders verworven competencies, EVCs, or lifelong training. The fact is, people need for there to be a structural recognition of the vacuum that has been created by generations of exclusion. And this vacuum will not be filled by suddenly saying we are diverse and we are going to start from now on to change our policy. It won't, because the people who need to be employed do not have the diplomas to fill in these empty spaces. They need to be accorded an added value in order to fill in these spaces. And we are bright enough to create this kind of, so quotas. I can understand now. Another thing that you brought up was the what do you call it, the pain and the trauma and so on. I dare say that the pain and the trauma is experienced by both the colonized and the colonizers, or the generations, or the progeny of the colonized and the colonizers. They just don't know it. They just don't know it. They were touched by the same knife and cut by the same knife, and while one is profiting from that knife and the other is suffering from that knife, they both have been victims of brainwashing, of propaganda. The fact that one knife teaches the other that they are dehumanized, that they are not worthy of being who they are, that they're less and they're inferior, and the other one is cheated that they are superior, that they are better than the other, that they deserve to be the saviors, is both of them are violent. Mm-hmm. So let us agree that decolonization is uncomfortable because we know that it involves loss. It involves a loss of power, a loss of space, a loss of legitimation, and this makes it really an uncomfortable topic to be addressed by the people involved. It involves acceptance of people who for years, generations, were considered not part of the system. It is a process of really opening up a scab and discovering that the wound underneath that scab is festering with pus, festering and oozing, and it needs to be irrigated completely before we can start again. So there is going to be pain in the process of decolonization. There is going to be pain and loss and trauma. And if we do not include a process of healing in the whole process of decolonization, then we lose the picture. I don't know what you think about that.
I would just say, why didn't you give this speech? Because you said it. Like, I don't have anything else to say. Like, you said it. Like, it's so true. Because I see there's other questions. I won't answer this because I'm sorry, you said it all. Like you said, you hit it right on there. I would just say, when you say what you said about, because you're right, the both sides feeling, or multiple sides, because not just two sides, right? I think now of the new book by Heather McGhee. It's called The Sum of Us. And in The Sum of Us, sorry, it's once again a Black woman writer. But of course, that's also what Gloria Wecker talks about in her book, is this understanding of that it's not only just hurting folks of color, but it's also hurting the mainstream society or the dominant society. But Heather McGhee's book, the new book, is really interesting in terms of what you said about how, but she focuses on racism, right, in the US, how racism actually impacts dominant society much more white dominant society, much more, but that's a whole nother thing. Should I take the other questions, Nozizwe? I see Mukasa Sankara has a question.
Yeah, the thing is, I'm actually just going to say now, it's better if we, if I get going over to the, I'm first going to try to present our 10 demands first, because if I got it right, you'll be staying throughout up until the panel is done as well, right? Yes. So Mukasa Sankara, if you don't mind, we just first want to present our demands first, and then have the panel discussion, and then we can definitely come back to the questions that that are still being asked, since you said you'll be here up until the end. But I just want to make sure that we also still have enough time for all of the other things. So right now, I'm just going to thank you again for that wonderful keynote. But then now I'm also just going to do a very quick presentation of the 10 demands. I know I sent them to everyone who sent an email. There's someone's audio is gone. I think it's Mukasa Sankara, if they can turn it off. Yeah, thank you. So I'm now just going to present our 10 demands. I'm not going to go too in depth into them. Normally everyone has received a PDF document of it. And also if someone can just quickly put the link to our blog where people can download it in the chat, that will be great. But I'm just going to now share screen on my presentation. So if everything is okay, normally you should all be seeing the presentation. Yeah, so again, I think I saw someone putting something in the chat, so I hope that's the link if you haven't yet received the manifesto text itself. But so yeah, essentially I'm just going to try and quickly explain what Undivided is, who we are. So we're a student-led organization. We were formed in 2017, and we discussed with a couple of students what topics students will be interested in. So essentially all the topics that we work on, it's not just me and some other people, like 2 other people who decided on them. It really is something we asked a couple of students what type of topics they're interested in and what they think KU Leuven is not doing enough of, essentially. So the topics that we came out with were decolonization of curricula and academia in general, gender and LGBTQ+ students, but it was very important for us to approach that from an intersectional perspective, because that is something that the KU Leuven doesn't do. Because what you normally see is that KU Leuven has, for example, a gender policy, but then the gender policy in itself is something that really only works for white women, for example, or not necessarily for Black women and women of color, and everyone else who falls out of the sort of like the white middle class default, essentially. So that's why we also really wanted to make sure that we can push for that intersectional perspective and make sure it's actually something that is also done within KU Leuven policy. So that's why, of course, as I said, we focus on the minoritized students. And then we do receive logistic and financial support from KU Leuven, but but at the end of the day, our opinions are independent. So we don't first ask for permission from the KU Leuven in some sense, in some way or form, before we form our opinions. It's something that is purely ours as students. And obviously, because we are student-led and we do have a couple of volunteers who also do help us with the work and everything else that we do. On our Undivided for KU Leuven YouTube, essentially, you can find a video where, I'm not going to play it now because we don't have time, but you can just go on YouTube. That's a video where we sort of like launched our manifesto with this morning. And we also give a very short description of a definition of what we understand under decolonization, essentially. So you can check that out. Just type in Undivided for KU Leuven on YouTube and you'll find the channel. So our very first demand, so we demand that KU Leuven ensures a curricula of all faculties are decolonized in a thorough manner. So this is not limited to curricula of electives, but also includes mandatory curricula followed by all students in each discipline. So why we wanted to put that in there is because obviously what usually happens is we say we're being taught a very Eurocentric perspective, and then the response is, yeah, but if you want to learn about Asian philosophy or African philosophy, whatever it is, then just choose that elective, you know. In our general classes, our mandatory classes will just teach you about Western things. That's usually the response we get. So that's why I wanted to really, really make sure that we really put in that distinction between, you can't just decolonize and say you're doing it within the electives, but it has to be something that every student actually is taught, essentially. So that's our first demand. Our second demand, and that's the one where Tunde was saying, we were giving a couple of examples, like how each discipline should do that. And so thank you definitely for the addition about psychology. So our second demand is, we demand that KU Leuven makes an extensive and structural policy plan to employ Black professors and professors of color within the university. And we simultaneously demand that KU Leuven makes a commitment to enact policy to engage more Black researchers and researchers of color within the different university faculties. Also something that you just mentioned just now in the to and fro you were having with Nyanchamwa as well, Tunde, that yeah, why are we afraid of quota, but also something that was also saying with the KU Leuven gender policy that really focuses on white women. And then we also see that, you know, there may be a couple of more female professors that came in the last couple of years, but they're majority, if not predominantly or exclusively white. So that's then the whole discussion about intersectionality as well. Our third demand, we demand that Black personnel and personnel of color within the university, so mainly present in manual jobs, are not outsourced in order to ensure they receive adequate payment for their essential work. So what we've noticed, and what a lot of us have noticed at KU Leuven, is that we don't see Black professors of color, not many Black researchers and researchers of color either. But where we do see Black people as personnel in KU Leuven is a lot of the people who clean, the cleaning personnel, and now with the exams, with COVID and everything. I remember there was, it was during one of the exam periods, I think in the first wave, and it was the exam periods, and the rector put a tweet where he was sort of like saying, yeah, I want to thank the cleaning personnel and so forth, and it was like Black people on the photo. And it was just very telling of the KU Leuven personnel, where you only see diversity when it comes to the manual jobs and the essential jobs, obviously. But then the question is, and also, so that is like a very big juxtaposition with professor body and people who do the manual and essential jobs, and also the big juxtaposition with the risk they have, the people who do manual and essential jobs, of being outsourced and falling into poverty as well. So we wanted to make sure we also include that in our demands. Our fourth demand is, we demand that KU Leuven makes physical space within all libraries, so faculty libraries and the central library, for books from academics that challenge the Eurocentric status quo that is predominant in our university. So that is a very clear one, because we usually see in our libraries, we usually see mainly white major academics and none of their Black or people of color counterparts. The fifth one, we demand that KU Leuven stimulates and funds research based on decolonial perspectives that are missing in our curricula. So that's also something that was mentioned yesterday in the talk in the online webinar of with Gloria Wecker that the KU Leuven hosted. There was also the whole thing of, you know, we're not learning about intersectionality or decolonial perspectives or critical race theory, because the research is obviously mostly done in countries like the United States of America and to some extent in the UK. But when it comes to like European countries on the European continent, it's not being done. And then when it is being done, it's now also being attacked. As I saw just now, you know, the whole talk about Islamo-gauchisme, Islamo-leftism that started in France, but that's also finding its way here in Belgium. So we also want to make sure that KU Leuven funds it, stimulates this research, but also protects the professors who do this type of research as well. The sixth demand, we demand that KU Leuven reflects critically on its international projects with non-Western countries in order to ensure that the university is not reproducing colonial practices in international cooperation. That also speaks for itself. The KU Leuven loves using the terminology of like ontwikkeling, samenwerking and development work, which that terminology is direct descendant of colonial rhetoric, because you're essentially telling non-Western countries that they have to follow a very Western model in order to be developed, which is obviously very colonial. So that's why we also wanted to put that in there. The seventh demand, we demand that KU Leuven actively acknowledges its own ties to and participation in Belgium's colonial history, and it must make the appropriate amends for human rights violations it or its personnel participated in. So yeah, a couple of examples of people who I see, for example, in the law library when I go there quite a while now, quite often now with my thesis. This is a portrait of Pierre Rijkmans. He was a Belgian Governor General in Belgian Congo, and he was obviously also very much affiliated with colonial law. He gave advice to the government and so forth. You can actually see his portrait in our law library, for example. Then you also have Eduard de Camp. He was also very much, he was also very much implicated in the entire Belgian colonial history as well, giving advice and all of those other things as well. You can also see his portraits in the law library, for example, and at Home Vesalius, which was it was called Maison Congolaise when the university was still obviously very much operating in French. But you can also see the colonial flag of Belgian Congo at the entrance of Home Vesalius, for example. So there you can see all of these very colonial, very distinct colonial relics, but they're not being acknowledged by the university, and the university is just trying to sweep them under the rug and act like they have nothing to do with it. The eighth demand, we demand that KU Leuven accommodates Black students and students of color within the university adequately. And that comes to a point that Tunde, you were talking about, but also about the mental health of Black students, for example, where you said, for example, we want to have Black psychologists and psychologists of color within the student services because they're not there at this moment in time. I think, like, especially I've not ever seen a Black psychologist within the student services, for example. So that would also be very necessary. Ninth demand, we demand that KU Leuven conducts and publishes independent and thorough research on racism at KU Leuven. We demand the publication of the findings from this research. So the findings from this research. So as you say, quite often with Undivided, we would like to see a bit more transparency from KU Leuven. So if they are going to do such research, it has to be very transparent as well. And our 10th demand, we demand a diversity policy focusing on actions and measures and not solely on ideals. So it has to be done with too many ideals, but really get to action and actually make things tangible, like what you were also saying in the beginning, Tunde, with the very good examples that you also gave. So that was it for me with the presentation of the demands. But now I am going to stop share. And now I'm going to go over to our panel discussion. So I'm not going to do the introduction of every speaker individually. I wanted to do that, but I'm not going to do that anymore. But I'm just going to leave it now to Nyanchama to just take it over. And we can obviously all start off, all panelists can just start off with saying their name, what they do, and then we can just get into the panel discussion. If you have questions, put them in the chat, and then we will get back to them towards the end of the panel discussion. So yeah, on to you, Nyanchama, our moderator.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Nozizwe. That was a quick whiz through the demands. Thank you. We needed that reminder of that. Now, I am going to follow your cue, and in the interest of saving time, I'm also not going to introduce the speakers because I think they can do that in like 2 sentences better than me. So it's not about who they are here. Take it from me, they are experts in their field. So as you introduce yourself, I would like you to also just, as each and every one of you introduces yourself, I'd like each and every one of you to reflect upon what Tunde said in his speech, particularly when he mentioned about the whole idea of, I mean, we talked about it, of course, about the difference between decolonizing the university and creating anti-colonial spaces. What is your definition from the perspective of your expertise on decolonization? So I give the ball to you. I don't know who I can call on. I don't know who I can call on first. Nicola?
Hello. Should I introduce myself? No, I'll just answer the question right away.
Or you can introduce yourself like
okay.
2 sentences.
So
like if people still want to know who you are.
Oh yeah, that's a good idea. So I'm Nicola. I'm a guest professor here at the KU Leuven in the music department, and I teach one course. It's a part-time course, which is learning about the guitar. So it's a guitar course, and my background, my musical background, I have both, I'm half American and half Italian, and my musical background has sort of reflects the places that I've lived in my life. I was raised in the States, and I had a particular music upbringing there, where I had the opportunity to play some Latin bands, and also some drum ensembles. Then I spent some time in Brazil, where I learned amazing things, and then I came back to study more at the conservatory in Italy, and now I'm here in Belgium. So my perspective on this, or my approach that I take, especially through music, is that representation is so important in music, and that's something that in a lot of conservatories we don't have. Although there's this presumption of the possibility that our conservatories and our music schools can represent the styles of music and the culture that they intend to transmit. So obviously, when you're talking about the classical conservatory, you're talking about a Western European classical music tradition, but now increasingly there's like jazz and things like that. Well, you know, these places, these institutes that are essentially schools that they're in the university, they have this presumption of defining like what music is, or what art music is. So it's a very old concept of art music, and I think that in terms of decolonizing that space, the very first thing that should happen is allowing that space to be opened and giving the physical space of who the professors are and what courses are taught and what music is listened to and what music is presented, opening up that space to other styles and not trying to control it, because especially in our contemporary world, that's not sustainable. And that's not very interesting, artistically and musically. So of course, when you try to criticize that, there's all sorts of justifications and excuses made for why things shouldn't happen or why changes shouldn't happen. So I am a believer that music and the arts in general can be a place where ideas can be discussed, not necessarily always on academic, with technical language, that they can be discussed by a variety of people from different backgrounds that don't necessarily always share the same physical language, the same background, and the same values. So I think that it's so hard with the arts because it mixes education with an expression. So it's sort of trying to toe the line between what we're teaching people, or first of all, what deserves to be taught, who's teaching it, who's learning it, and then by extension, what the students are going to use that for, what are they going to express? So it's very, very complicated issues. So yes, the decolonialism is very important in the arts, I think.
Thank you very much, Nicola. Those are interesting points. I'll come back to that. But I'll now give the floor to Seung. Seung, could you please introduce yourself and maybe comment about the questions I asked?
Yeah, thank you very much. Yes, so my name is Xingyan, and I'm doing my PhD here at KU Leuven. Maybe I should also mention that I did my BA and MA also here, so it's kind of like I spent a lot of time in Leuven, and this gives me a lot of happiness and also quite a feeling of engagement that now there's Undivided, like taking up these initiatives. And also thank you so much for inviting me here and actually giving me space to share my ideas on this topic, because it's really a great opportunity to meet other people who care about these topics, because I think the network, I wasn't very much aware that it existed. As to your question, I think my answer would differ a little bit from Nicola, because I don't necessarily focus on representation per se, because I think I am very much informed by the tradition of philosophy and the debate within philosophy that questions who are considered to be trustworthy knowledge giver and who are not. So that's the focus that I really zoom in on in order to discuss and reflect on the issues of decolonial decolonization projects. So what do I mean by this? I mean that within university, some people are regarded as more trustworthy knowledge givers than those who are not. So I'm not even talking about at the level of representation who should take claim within the university. Before even that, I want to kind of diagnose a new problem which should be used as a tool of reflection when we look into the dynamics that we have right now, depending on the embodied nature of these voices. Some voices are heard more and some voices are heard less. So of course, what I'm saying is that voices of color are immediately considered due to racial prejudices towards certain ethnicities, religious backgrounds, and so on. Their voices are considered to not transmit any important knowledge, and therefore they're not considered to be belonging in any circle of debate or any circle of conversation and so on. So that's where my reflection lies. So often when students address topics that are written by specific types of people, they say, very radical and very judgmental stuff without actually trying to read and understand what they're saying. So I think there we need to find it, we need to identify it, and also we need to argue that it is wrong and we should not do this. So that's basically one aspect that I am considering. Another thing that I also wanted to mention, because we were asked to reflect on the keynote, actually I want to go back to the debate that was that occurred after the presentation, especially about quotas. I am for quotas. I think Tunde really did a great job exposing why it is important that we need people here for the sake of being here, in order to reflect those who participate in a broader context of society and how they should also be present at that nominal representation and to take space in the university. I think this should be done despite the importance of recognition that all people deserve in terms of meritocratic benefits. Of course, people do want to receive recognition that when you are hired for something, you're not hired just because you are Black or because you're Asian and whatnot, but you're hired because you have something to say. But I think the fact of the matter that we need to embrace and also recognize is that when people of color are hired, they're considered to be hired for pity anyways. So why not just embrace quotas and then make that happen so that people get compensation one way or the other? That was also one thing that I wanted to mention. One last mild question that I had was, why did the manifesto divide or kind of disjoint Black and of color. I was just curious about this. So I was wondering whether we could also open up a debate on this. I think I'm also just wanting,
Yeah.
you know,
Okay.
diversity.
All right. Thank you very much. We will definitely pick up on that question because it's something that troubles me. I personally have a problem with etiquette. I have a problem with all these terminologies, and but that's my personal view. So I'm glad you brought it up, and we will pick it up later. So I give the mic to Lynn.
Yes, thank you very much. So my name is Lynn Salma, and I'm unfortunately not any PhD student or a professor or anything yet. I'm still a very humble political science student at KU Leuven. I'm also a volunteer with Undivided. And I'm here today to offer a perspective of a student, but also of a Muslim female student, as well as I can hopefully do this justice, and also as a student with the background of immigration, a student who came as an immigrant to Belgium before I became a student at KU Leuven even. So, so decolonization in all these contexts can take hours to kind of talk about and then discuss also personally, but I will try to give the most important characteristics of what decolonization could look like in my context and in my daily life as a student at KU Leuven. I think the most prominent one is not being not being framed, not necessarily by the university, but also by society and by politics, not being framed as a Syrian immigrant, as a crisis in the term of refugee crisis, not being talked about as a crisis, not being talked about as a threat or as a burden to Europe, to the European Union, to Belgium, and to my local, communities. When I'm saying me, I'm saying this not just me as a person, but also about my community, the Syrian diaspora, and fellow diasporas that have the characteristic of a majority of refugees among them. This perception by society and this treatment that we get in many of the systems of within Belgium, truly, I'm convinced that it is caused mainly by educational institutions, because everyone that is now in power positions in these institutions has been educated for the majority of their lives in Belgian institutions, and not only in high school but also in university. There were many chances, many years for these people to be educated on how to how to tackle how to tackle issues of refugees, of migrants, social issues, more justly and more intersectionally, and also anyway, moving on, because I have a lot of things to say, but so really truly decolonization in that context would look like to me as being perceived not just as a survivor or as an equal, but really being seen as a source of power, of resilience, of leadership, even in my community, not only to people who are refugees or immigrants, but to those who are not as well. I think also what can be seen in class, for example, moving on to a more academic setting, is instead of, for example, to having do research myself on points of view that are different to those that I'm being taught in class, and having to add that workload on myself and to prepare before class, and then going into a classroom and try to present and counter argument, you know, with the things, sorry. Yeah, having to counter argument and bring up alternative discussion points, and being framed as that student, you know, who's always critical, or that student who might be seen as too emotional because she's always trying to, you know, involve her own identity in this, or trying to change the subject, or, you know, because I am not conforming to the frames that are being presented to me, but also being seen as a representative for all minority students, or being seen as a representative for the entire you know, minority groups in society as a whole within the classroom, which is a burden that should not fall on anyone. So moving on to a more kind of curriculum-based example of what decolonization can look like is, you know, trying to counter the normalization of conflict and suffering in non-Western countries in my curriculum, sorry. So for example, you know, focusing on how development aid is used as a neocolonial tool to kind of strengthen the interdependency, and which has helped very much this normalization of conflict and suffering in many African, Asian, and South American countries. And so you know, parallelly to that, not viewing conflict, for example, from my region, from the Middle East, not to view it also solely as a political conflict, and not, you know, just sticking that label on it directly, but truly try to analyze it more politically, and try to also acknowledge European roles in the conflict, and acknowledge the role that, you know, European colonization has played in the way these countries are today, and the way they're run politically, and the social, you know, implications today. So yeah, again, there are so many examples, and I think also my field of studies, political science, is one of the most obvious, you know, fields for the topic of decolonization. But these are just very few examples that I wanted to kind of shed a light on, and I will give you back the mic. I'm sorry for taking so much time.
No, you're fine. I mean, first of all, before I move on to Nozizwe, I have to remind you that you are an important, in fact, a key member of the university. A university cannot survive without its students. You have got every right to sit in this panel, so no excuses there. So don't apologize. So I give the mic to Nozizwe.
Yeah, there's not really much I can add after all the other people have also put in such great input. But I think primarily for me, I think I can really take you know how when you're very young and you understand that something is wrong, but you don't have the terminology to sort of like put it into words. Like, for example, you know, you can see like, okay, here there's inequality, you know, like there's gender inequality or something of the sense, but you can't put it into words. You don't know what feminism is yet. But I think I can also sort of like pin back to a distinct point when I realized there's something wrong about the education that I receive, and there's something wrong with the books that I read and the information that they're giving me. And I was very young. I'm born in Zimbabwe, and I was born in Zimbabwe, and I lived there up until I was 14. And I will be reading some books, I guess, and then the book would be about, like, you know, the things that people discovered and who was the first person to discover, I don't know, like a light bulb, some of those type of things. And essentially the entire book is just listing up a whole list of white people, mostly men, who discovered some, you know, very essential things and so forth. And I remember just thinking, didn't people in Africa discover some? Didn't they also, you know, come up with some inventions of some sort? And why am I not reading about this? But obviously I was very young at the time, and I'm not really going to know that there's such an entire concept and an entire concept around decolonization of our epistemologies and our knowledge systems and so forth, which obviously skew us in order to sort of like understand things as, you know, as white people are the only people who can discover things, white people are the only people who can create legitimate knowledge, for example. And then coming on now to when I started studying law, then I realized that what I was studying with regards to divorce law, public law, whatever it is that you want to call it, constitutional law, I discovered that I would not, once I finish studying, which I'm going to be doing in not too much of a time, I don't feel equipped to be able to help people who look like me if I was to be a lawyer or whatever it is that I was going to do in the legal field, because I am learning about law from the perspective of a white person, mostly male, middle class, upper middle class, high, anything above that. And so therefore I couldn't even be able to help myself with the knowledge that I have, because the law that we learn is just not geared to help people in poverty, geared to help, Black women, women of color and so forth. So that was for me then, I think, the point where I really started getting frustrated, and then I really started understanding the whole concept of decolonization a lot more. And I think that has then also pushed me to make very conscious choices about, you know, things like what research I do if I'm writing a thesis, for example, of what I'm doing now, who I cite when I'm writing the thesis as well is also very important. Who am I using as my starting point? And all those very distinct and very clear choices that I have to make, because I understand the positionality that I have, me specifically being a Black woman and writing a topic, and how the perspective that I choose to take on it is also obviously very telling in that sense. So yeah, shortly, that is how I would answer that question.
Excellent. Thank you. This has been quite a journey. I mean, just talking to the four of you, I still don't feel we answered the question of what is decolonization, but we'll come back to that. That's not a problem. I liked it. I liked, Nicola, your perspective when you brought about your, and it's a theme that ran through all the other panelists. Like, you know, where do we start with the story? Who is holding the microphone? Who usually does not hold the microphone? And what do we consider as expertise? What do we consider as knowledge? What are the implications of this, you know, Eurocentric bias in knowledge production? I come back to, again, the four of you. I'll come back to Nicola and ask, you know, your perspective is art, is music. And I know about, you know, 25 years ago, we had a momentum similar to this one of Black Lives Matter. Well, not similar, but it was well strong. Virkan for Africa, where the highlight was on art. The highlight was on art and musicians. And on that level, there was a sense of synergy and a sense of oneness that we could really understand and relate to one another. How do you feel about the role of music, of art, in this whole conversation on decolonization? Do you think that it is well represented, or are we going to again trickle down to exoticism and maybe just relegating art from the other as being just, you know, what do you call it? Just artifact or artisanal? And then Seong Eun, I'm following you up on your questions on epistemic injustices, and wondering what you could comment, especially because it's linked up with the first demand on when people are talking about decolonizing the curriculum, they are actually talking about the epistemic injustices. They are actually tracing it right way back to Descartes and his question of I think and therefore I am, which centered the university in that whole idea of uni and context me being the what do you call it? The male white Western man. But this whole idea has been incorporated into universities, making them uni in their way of thinking, uni in their context, and excluding all other voices, all other, voices that exist that can participate and be experts. So what can you say about the whole idea of epistemic injustices in education. And then when I come to Lynn, I'm sorry, I'm going to just bunch up my questions because it's easier that way. And indeed, you are right when you talk about the whole idea of identity. In fact, a lot of diasporans exist in constant states of uprootedness, and there is almost a silencing of the role that is played by the Belgians in the whole movement towards migration, and in the whole the whole kind of discourse that is created around the migration narrative. What more can be done to improve this status? What role can be better played? For example, especially if the university can engage itself in negotiating, in engaging in conversation with policymakers with regard to migration, with regard to the status of people who have been touched by this experience, and to kind of balance out the discourse that evolves around it, and then of course when I come to Nozizwe, I am so glad you bring up all these issues about the lack of representation when it comes to your studies. And also sometimes we come to the realization from very odd instances, the realization that this cannot be true. This can't be true. We come to this realization from very different topics. This whole discussion about wokeness, this whole discussion about trying to understand who am I, where am I from, what is my authenticity, what do I represent, and who do I represent? Is actually, I think, one of the driving forces in what you have achieved so far. What makes us reflect and continue to reflect and understand that it is a reflection that will be ongoing about your own identity, about how you represent other people in your subject, in your choices of study, in your choices of who you focus in your study, and in your choices of who is the audience. Is the audience that is going to judge you and gauge you in your studies, and eventually who are you going to represent when you finally graduate. So I don't know if I make sense in my questions, but I go back to Nicola and I let you.
So Liv, your question, you asked me about what I thought about this, the position of this festival. What was it? The Vierkant Festival?
Yeah, Vierkant for Africa. Yeah.
So I'm not familiar with that particular
it was 25
festival.
years ago. You were just a kid.
Well, yeah.
25 years ago.
But the commodification of Black culture, especially in American music and American art, and also in European art, is there from the beginning of the mass culture that we have. So in terms of American music, it goes all the way back to the beginning of like blackface minstrel songs, and like who was performing them and who was writing these songs, and like there was entire systems about like the ways that Black performers had to deal with the existence of this whole thing. Then it went through vaudeville, the same thing. And then after all of that went out of style, the same dynamics existed, but they just took on different clothes. So in terms of the commodification, nowadays we live in a time where people are very hungry for what people have been using the word the other. I'm familiar with that term through this essay by Bell Hooks. She talks about eating the other, and about like this theme of cannibalizing culture and the effect that has. So in that regard, it's very complex, because on the one hand, there's a very high demand by everybody Black culture. And on the other hand, there's also this lack of how can I describe it? Of realness in Black culture, because so much of the Black cultural production is made for white audiences. So this commodified culture gets created. It's like a synthesis of all the things that happen, and of course the people that make it are not necessarily always aware of everything that they're putting into their art. Sometimes sometimes art is reactive, sometimes art is very intellectual, sometimes art is not even aware that it's being art. So in terms of these dynamics, there's also feedback loops. So for example, in the 70s and in the 60s in American music, there was lots of funk. Okay, well, lots of funk music, that was the music that was the Black music of the time. And it was very much informed by reinterpretations of continental African rhythms and histories that had happened. Then it gets repackaged. Is it fair, or is it accurate to call it African music? Is it fair to call it American music? Does America own this new culture? Who are the Americans that own? All of these questions. And all of a sudden you start getting into the globalization of this culture. The questions just keep multiplying, because then the stages become international. So now even in it sounds like this VidCon festival was a very large international festival. All of these people are buying, selling. One African performer that comes to mind right now is Fatoumata Diawara, and she's very popular right now. She plays the guitar. She's a wonderful singer. She's also an actress. Part of her performance is her identity as an African person. So it's sort of it's mind-boggling, because on the one hand, as a white consumer, you say, oh well, I recognize that she's pumping up and she's exemplifying her Africanness with tokens that come from her actual background. Whether or not all of these things are like real or authentic, it's not easy to answer. So I think that it all comes down to the commodification, and there are no easy answers to this. But the thing that I think is important is that the people who define these commodities do it on their own terms, and that's not always possible. And that's part of the conversations that we have to have also as performers and as consumers.
Yeah,
we didn't even talk about appropriation. We didn't even talk about that, but we could.
No, let's move on and give somebody else a chance to speak.
Yes.
But you're right, appropriation is a very important part of this conversation. But let's give the other panelists a chance to also have their say. Yeah, Sion?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for the great question. I will also try to be very brief. I do think that epistemic injustice, which basically means that if you speak as a person of color or a person with specific sexual orientation or religion, whatever you say is faced with lesser credibility. That's what it means. I do think that it does have a significant, like it occurs a lot within the university context, even when people demand decolonization of university. Unfortunately, those who are considered to be members, in-group members, if it comes from that, then that demand for decolonization is taken more seriously than when it comes from, usually people of color or people who are considered to be typical subjects who are marginalized. So I do think that there's that going on. I think one way that we can cope or we can address this is basically by, forming stable and functioning solidarity, and as it is occurring and happening today. I think this really works. I think it's a good way of trying to advance the goal. Of course, it doesn't necessarily mean that the individuals themselves will benefit, because I think it's a long process, and usually people who participate in these issues are people with short-term contracts, people who kind of appear and then disappear, those kind of precarious situation is always there. So unfortunately, that part I think is more difficult to remedy. But in general, just coalitions, not cooptation, but coalitions in a good, well-intending, open conversations. I think that's one way that issues such as deficient credibility can be fought, or combated. So I think that would be my answer.
No, really, really great answer. Thank you very much. But when it comes to, sorry that I just push a little bit more with you, but when it comes to, and thank you very much for normalizing and giving a very normal definition of epistemic injustices. That's really great. But, when you brought up, when you introduced yourself, you talked about your focus being more on knowledge resources, and also that you are informed by the philosophy of who is a knower and who is not a knower, whereby some knowledge systems are subject to erasure, subject to silencing than others. And in this way, it makes me think about the fact that analytical tools analytical tools are classically very male-oriented, very male-structured, and in this sense, they tend to be completely impoverished in accessing certain knowledge resources. Isn't it perhaps time for us to re-evaluate these analytical tools, these male audiences that also stand as judge and jury to the information that is already produced with very impoverished tools, if I can put it that way? How can we address this? So it's not even a fact of being given the space, but it is just not accessible. Yeah, especially when we're talking about non-articulatable knowledge resources, whereby the analytical tools as we know them are really gauged towards articulated knowledge, towards measurable knowledge. But we know in many societies, a huge amount of their knowledges are really not subject to this kind of tools. How do you think we can address that?
So I think diverse perspectives do mitigate that worry. I do think that there are pockets of incredible original scholars who basically use the given tools in order to show what it's capable of. So one of the things that I find that's super interesting is how people use very androcentric concepts in order to develop something that is the very opposite of that, and then really dismantle the issue androcentrism from the inside. So I think that's one way that, theoretically speaking, people can strive towards. And another way that we can address this issue is simply by listening to other people, then trying to talk more. I think that's one thing that a lot of people, especially in philosophy, fail to manage. And I think I'm also susceptible to that problem. I think one way that I could mitigate that worry is to, paying more space for testimonies from non-scholars, or just basically looking at actual world, what happens in there, in order to basically work on something called, grounded theory. And I think that way it can be mitigated.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. That was an excellent answer. Thank you very much. Lynn, can I give the floor to you?
Yes, of course. So I'm going to also try to keep it very short, and I have 3 very concrete examples of action points or of suggestions to kind of on the role that the university can play to accommodate, immigrants and refugees on its own, but also kind of with the government. So my first one is the most obvious one, because I have family members who were directly affected by it, is to ease and better facilitate the equalization of diplomas of refugees and immigrants who come to Belgium. I cannot, describe enough how empowering and humanizing it is to be able to work in the expertise that you have dedicated your life's work to, and not having to start literally from scratch when you're 50 years old or 40 years old and already have had 20 years of experience in your field. So that's the first thing. And I know, systems are already in place for this, but they are so, they're almost impossible to follow. And, there are so many better examples around the world, such as Germany and Canada, who have implemented better integrated equalization systems for refugees and immigrants. The second, step that can be taken is to offer special status trainings and diplomas that are funded by the government, but that are also supported and encouraged by social services for these immigrants and refugees. Because the case is, when you come into Belgium as an immigrant or a refugee, and if you are being supported monthly by OCMW or the social services of Belgium, it is the fact that once you have the minimum knowledge of the language, you are pushed to take the first job opportunity that they find for you or that you find for yourself. And often that is outside of the person's expertise. Often that is also very, manual jobs that the person is not particularly interested in pursuing at all. And it is also the case that they would cut you off financially if you don't accept that job. And so not only developing that, the university develops these special trainings and diplomas that can be obtained by immigrants and refugees, but also to have the government and the government social services actively encourage, immigrants and refugees to take these on. And these can be, for example, for people who have had a lot of professional experience before coming here in a certain field, but might have not had a bachelor's degree or a master's degree, or the necessary training, or they might have they might have had the necessary training back home, but they need to fill in certain gaps that are country specific. And so this can be developed for these type of people. And my third and last suggestion can be also a very obvious one, is that the university can develop programs that target communities, schools, that are underrepresented in the university, with experience days, with workshops, but also to offer, through these programs, to offer free academic support to immigrants and refugees, high school students. So wow. Yeah, these are very concrete examples.
Oh my God, I think that is a really wonderful answer. I mean, I worked in the VDAB. I was an inwerking consulent. And so I know that there's a problem mostly, and also as somebody with 2 masters who has never worked on a master's level, I just, it's frustrating. So yeah, and I know that the burden of equalizing, getting an equivalence to your diploma is placed on the individual. So again, it's a form of victim bashing. NARIC can do better in an age where we are now, you know, we are now with social media and everybody has got internet anywhere in the world, universities should be able, and government officials should be able to communicate with each other on that level. It should not be the student who should shoulder this burden, you know. And also, what is very ironical, if there are 2 Syrian students, each of them has to follow this process individually. They're not going to go, oh yeah, but we had a Syrian student this afternoon, so we know that this diploma is equivalent. No, they're going to make you do all that. And so that is a big problem. Also, the whole idea of spatial status, I think it's also a really nice idea, because in many times, I know many people tend to say manual jobs, but it's actually menial jobs. It's jobs that are really substandard, that you know are way below you, because a lot of manual jobs can be good, you know, they can be okay just because you use force and everything. But yeah, indeed, this is what OCMA does. And just when you get the very bare minimum, you can barely communicate, you're made to work. So it's a really big problem when you know that there are also so many other ways in which your status, your credibility, your competence can be acknowledged. For example, using, like I said, AVCs, elders verworven competencies, your competence, your talent, your train the trainer, on the job training, lifelong training, and so on. So these are good points, incredible points that you brought up, but I'm going to give the mic to Nozizwe and we'll pick it up later.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. So yeah, in relation to sort of like the question, what really stuck to me the most about the question was the part about like sort of like the question of who do you represent? And I think yeah, that was also within the work that we were doing when we were writing the manifesto as well. It was also definitely this whole towing a line of, you know, you have the reality of we are in this very white institution, obviously, and then you have white people who, my white co-students, who are afforded their individuality in essence. So every single white student who comes there is an individual. Whereas for me, I am immediately, as Nozizwe, I am this incarnation of all Black people, Black women, if you are to go very, you know, specific. And then you've got that aspect, but then at the same time, what we also then did realize is obviously, so you're sort of like, as a minoritized person, then you are sort of like put into this community type of thing. And I think for quite a while, a lot of us maybe do grapple with that, of that whole thing of like, sometimes I do want to be an individual as well, and I don't necessarily want to always be representing someone or something. But I think at a certain time, we started embracing that a lot more. When I say we, I think of like a couple of my friends of mine, we started seeing the strength of the whole community aspect in this very white institution itself. So fine, if you want to. So the thing is, when you're an individual and there's not too many of you, like for example, you're sitting in an auditorium, I don't know, a lot of examples that I have, like with the law auditorium, maybe there's like 2-3 of you who are Black people in the auditorium, then it's like, oh, you're not, you know, whatever, they're whatever, we don't care about them. We're just going to act like they don't exist, essentially. Sometimes you may have a lot of attention, but usually it's just kind of like, let's let them be, you know, it's something we can still kind of accept. And then when we started deciding, oh, fine, let's bring students with an African background together, let's create a community for ourselves, essentially. And that's when the whole idea of Karibu was sort of birthed. And that's when we started coming together and saying, you know, because KU Leuven is so vast and so big, we're all spread among so many different faculties. So it's not, you know, so maybe you have a couple of people who are studying biomedical sciences, you have a couple of people who are studying, when I say people, I mean minoritized people, who are studying, I don't know, archaeology or architecture, whatever it is. But because you're so far away from each other, you don't see each other, and you might feel in that sense very alone. But and then we started coming together, and what I then started realizing was that because we started coming together, then immediately the first question was, why are these people ganging up together? You know, why are they creating these communities that are based on their cultures? Why are they? And then all of a sudden we were a threat. So, you know, when I'm an individual when I'm sort of like in the auditorium, then it's like, oh yeah, whatever, she's there. We can sort of like get with that. But then when we start coming together, when we start embracing that community that we have, how little it may be, all of a sudden we're this very big threat, to the point where people are calling UNIA and saying you have to see if they're violating the anti-discrimination law, because they're only creating activities that are based on African cultures. How dare they? So we essentially had to like prove and say like, no, but like the basis is obviously African cultures. But there's no article clause anywhere saying white people cannot come. And the thing is, it's not necessarily that many white people wanted to come to these events. It was just, for them, it was just this idea of how could you have the audacity in this very white institution to then come and create these little mini communities that you have. So I think it's a very big whirlwind of you being an individual, but at the same time also representing a whole lot of a community of people, and then embracing that community that you are purported to represent. And when you finally do that, then you are this threat, because how dare you do something like that within this white institution. And just to couple that with also as well, like the whole representation thing, of course, who do you represent? I think it's also we're also towing that line as well. Within the manifesto, if you see, we didn't, for example, demand that, like the highest decision-making bodies in the university. So you look at something like the HEBU, the academic council, or the executive board, whatever. These are exclusively white boards, essentially. And they're the ones that decide on things like funding, money, the direction the university goes, what you're going to invest in. And we didn't, for example, say we want a Black person in one of these bodies, or we want a whatever type of person in this body, because what is the purpose of putting that minoritized person in that body if the decisions they're going to make are still going to be the same? You're sort of like just putting someone there for the sake of putting them there. And that's also, I think, also ties into some of the points that some other people were saying, that and it's also really about, okay, fine, let's fight for something, but then outside of that boards that that makes all those other decisions based on money and so forth. But yeah, those are just a couple of thoughts that I had on your question.
Thank you, really sharp. I mean, your explanation of Caribou, it breaks my heart. Now we are really running out of time, and I have got 3 questions. I know we are not going to be able to answer these 3 questions. I could put them out there, but and prioritize what I would really like us to answer. So the 3 questions are, I was thinking, what was brought up right at the beginning, the whole issue of the etiquette. What terms can we use? What terms can we avoid? Can we continue to paste an etiquette on certain categories of people who live here? And what is the impact of the terms that we use? Terms like, for example, autochtone, people of color, people of migration background, Blacks. Each of them has got a certain load, a certain innuendo, a certain implication in its, which is not unbiased. And this creates a problem of the etichetting. Do we really need to be labeled? That's one question which you don't have to answer, think about it. Another question is the whole point of terminologies, because terminologies frame the context. And like it has been pointed out before, things like development, for example, which are so infused with its colonial roots, or even the whole question of talking about victims of racism. Why victims? Because when you talk about a victim, you immediately strip the victim of their agency. You immediately make the victim less empowered than the perpetrator. Why can't we use terms like target and so on? So the importance of terminologies and being very reflective about exactly what we are using and what we mean by what we are using, the implication of it. But the question that think about these questions in your mind. If we have time, we'll answer them. But the one that I really want you to think about is what about the way forward? How do we move forward? This has been a magnificent manifesto. It has been very well written, very grounded in citations and theory. I am completely 100% for it. I really laud the effort that has been put into it. but it still fails short to really give the concrete, the concrete, many people in policy want to almost be spoon-fed with the concrete, what are the steps forward? What can we do from now on? What can we do to show that we are actually undertaking this manifesto seriously and we are really putting it into action? When can you say, like, yeah, they have responded to our manifesto and they are doing exactly what we require, and so on. So I don't know if we can answer this immediately, or we can first give the floor to the questions. Give some moment to just peruse at the questions that have been posted by the audience, and then that way you'll have time to just think about how to answer this. Nozizwe, what do you think?
I think we can just first go into what you just said, and then maybe then go and see the couple of questions we just got here in the chat. So I would propose to first just get into what you just asked here now.
So I know they are loaded questions, but let's try to be pithy so that we can, I know it's a big ask. It's a big ask, but let's try to be pithy in our answers. Thank you.
I have a very short thing that I could add. So there's this composer, Toru Takemitsu, and he talks about, he died in 1996, and he's Japanese. And one of his interests was trying to navigate all of these labels that were being projected onto him as being a Japanese composer of Western classical music. He was trying to navigate all of these complexities. And he made a very interesting observation. He said, you cannot create a new world. And in his case, he was talking about a world of sound, but I think it's applicable to other things. You cannot create a new world without it making the past clearer. So he said that the formula for success in creating something new is doing something which is new and stimulating, but also clarifies what happened before. So I think that's interesting because it puts the focus not only on what is new and different and new and different and new and different, but also understanding the past and understanding where it comes from. And then it comments on the past and also shows a way forward. So I think that's an interesting model.
Absolutely profound. Absolutely profound. Thank you very much.
Just because there's a concern of time, I will allow Lean to speak because I think you should speak more than me. So please go ahead.
Absolutely not. I mean, if you had anything to add, I'm happy to give you my time as well. I mean, to be completely honest, I might focus on the later question of what now. How can these things be? Like where can we go from here? And obviously, this is just, although it has lasted a long time to finally finalize this because of the power it has, which shows in the text that it has been written in the manifesto. But this is the first step, indeed. To be completely honest, it is a cooperation, and it is going to be, I don't know if the word compromise is correct here, but we're going to have to seriously sit together and talk and see what's possible. This is, at least to me, this is not a some sort of just a critical article of the university, or this is how it should be and you're not. It is a genuine, invitation to start working on this together and to think of ways where this can be our reality. Although probably not for us, our generation of students, hopefully for those to come. So I think Undivided has definitely set the very first and important, step of putting this out there. But the what do you call it? The betrokken parties need to go in conversation together. That's how it all starts.
I love that. I love that. You know, in the Orient, in the East, they say a journey of 1,000 miles starts with the first step. And indeed, this manifesto is the first step. And we know that the journey is long and tedious, but we do not have to be scared to be pioneers. To be pioneers is good. We may not see the end. We may not see the realization of decolonization, but we've taken the first step. And where do we go from here? It is a we story, because there's more that binds us than what divides us. And it is a story of co-creation, co-participation, and compromise, of oneness. So yeah, beautifully said. Thank you very much. So, Xiangson?
I would also like to take up the same question. What do we do from here onwards? And then also sort of answer halfway to what Nico raised in chats. I think we just now have to start talking about it more often to other people and to broaden the network, because what I noticed on the basis of my participation in my own personal network of the institute that I work in, the Philosophy Institute, people are interested. People really, really want to hear, not only because they want to learn, but also because oftentimes they agree. Of course, there are people who don't agree, and people who don't agree are often in the privileged position of power. But I think people are growing more and more sympathetic, and not only sympathetic, they're starting to pay normative significance to the topic. So I think all we need to do is just normalize it, talk about it, take it up, and while talking about it, be aware where we lack experience, where we should basically lower our voices, when to participate more active than other people, and basically kind of be smart with the dynamics. And I think that would be where we should be headed to.
Yeah, I'm just gonna go in as well and try to get to as many, or to try to answer to what you asked, Nyanjama. So the thing is, yeah, this manifesto is very imperfect. Like there's, looking at it now, I just see like so many things that we missed, so many things that we did wrong. And so I'm not going to try and sit here and act like it's the best thing that could have been produced or whatever. And I think I just want to just be clear on that as well, that obviously there's obviously a lot of shortcomings that we have in there as well, but I do think it could definitely add something else to the debate now, or at least a discussion, hopefully within the university, because maybe there is, at least I know in KU Leuven, there has been this perception of, no, but it's just really, this whole decoloniality thing. It's just a couple of, very niche professors, niche researchers who are doing this, and it doesn't really pertain to Europe, it doesn't really pertain to Belgium, doesn't really have anything to do with us. You hear a lot of these arguments as well. And I think what we really just wanted to do was to just show that signal of, there's another very important part of the university. As you said yourself, students are a very, very important part of the university, if not the core of it. They themselves, we are also very much thinking about this topic, and want to see the university taking some sort of initiative. Because if there is something about KU Leuven, I'm just going to be very candid about this, if there is something about KU Leuven that very much disappoints me, it is the performativity and the symbolism that this institution takes when it comes to, when it's finally time to actually prove that you are actually taking steps in a certain direction. And I think we can, to just be also very candid with that, you see that when you look at how the university handles things such as the death of Sanda Dia, if you look at how the university, just wants to brand itself and so forth. There's just a very different priority there when it comes to it. It's more about image, it's more about how will we be perceived, and not necessarily about how do minoritized students within the institution itself, how do they already see and perceive us, and how do they want, which direction do they want this institution to go? So I just hope that, for me, my wish is very simple. I just want to at least receive one response, from one sign of life from the rector and the vice rector responsible for diversity, that they have seen it and they've read it, and also that they're also very transparent, of course, in which ways that they are actually going to try to implement some of these things. And that being said, that also means if they're not going to implement anything, then I also want to hear that they're not going to implement anything. So, that's just the big thing for me. It's the transparency and not, just don't hide behind the symbolism, the performativity. We don't have time for it anymore. But yeah, that's essentially how I see it. Yeah, so that's what I had to say on that.
Okay, thank you very much, Nsizwe. Oh, that the manifesto is not perfect. Good. I'm glad it's not perfect, because that really reflects what this is all about. It is an ongoing conversation. It needs to be dynamic. It is a work in progress, and you have brought out an incredible first step. But it is exactly that. It is a work in progress, and it is going to continue being worked on. And it will go, if it was an end in itself, that would be really sad. If this is all it takes, that would be really sad. So it's okay that it's imperfect. It's okay that it's still a work in progress. I also liked what Xiong Yun said about the normalizing, because at the moment it's like a strange topic, It's like, everyone is talking about it as if it's exotic. It's got nothing to do with us, but it has got everything to do with us. And we need to normalize this conversation so that we move on and start acting, so that we move on and move into action, so that we move on and start healing. So there is a need to have more and more academicians, more and more philosophers, more and more people in the field, people who are engaged in these conversations, engaging others who are not really party to this conversation, to start to converse about it. I do have some final, last words, but I think I would like to give the floor now to questions that may be by the audience.
Yeah, so I'm going to ask everyone who I will be directing the question to obviously try to keep it as succinct as possible. I still see there are a lot of people, present, so we're really happy about that. Sorry, we're over time, but I definitely do want to ask a couple of these questions. So this one was directed to Tunde, because I see he's still online. So Tunde, this question is for you. The person said, I would be thankful if Tunde would be willing to say more about what could have been, or what he called a possible abolitionist or transformative approach that could have been tried by the KU Leuven in the case of Sandadia. But that's the question essentially. I don't have to read the last words. Tunde, if you're still, I see your name. Yes.
Yeah, I'm still here. I was actually afraid of that question. The reason why is that, is the person still present by any chance who asked that question?
It was Brunilda Pali. Let me just check in the participants list if she's still here. I'm not entirely sure. Yes, according to the list, she is here.
Yeah, so I mean, we have obviously lived within a system. We live in a punitive system, right? For the system that we live in, this very hard system that people have to be punished and, send off somewhere to suffer, maybe this is the best that was possible, but I don't think so. I think that what has happened now is that we have kind of, so maybe I'll answer it like this, that the problem with this sort of approach now, with the fact that they're saying that these students can't attend KU Leuven anymore. They make it seem as if, like I kind of said in the talk, they make it seem as if the problem are the students, whereas the problem is exactly the structure. The problem is exactly the racism embedded in KU Leuven. So I hope that answers part of your question. And then the other part is just the fact that transformation is really about asking us, how do we involve perpetrators, people who've done harm, in this case, really serious detrimental harm? How do we ask them to be part of how we heal towards the future, so that we don't continue to put a Band-Aid on kind of these atrocities, you know, and find real sustainable answers that will kind of create healing for not only KU Leuven, but also for Sanda Dia's parents, and also for the communities linked to this reality.
Yeah, thank you very much, Tunde, for that answer. I hope that was it was definitely for me very very informative, and I definitely do think that the person who asked it also appreciates it. But there was a point in time when we mentioned something about psychology. It was you as well, Tunde. You also mentioned about that. You also talked about psychology when you were speaking about how you know, it was sort of like giving tangible examples of how each discipline can decolonize, and then that we didn't specifically mention psychology. But this person is saying, psychologically speaking, how can the processes of decolonization and the creation of safe spaces be framed in terms of effective strategies to achieve the goals? So I'm no expert, but it seems to me that psychology, or even neuroscience, offers lights regarding how hard it is to convince other human beings of ideas that are challenging to them. As it was mentioned, there is a loss implied in accepting decolonizing actions. How do we take that loss into account? What is effective and what isn't? And how to minimize the risk of only provoking defensiveness and finding closed ears and minds in those that we need to reach with our reasoning and arguments. That was the question.
Is that a question for me? Is that for somebody else?
It was not specified, so essentially anyone can answer.
I mean, I guess, you know, the thing is, you know, we're always going to find closed ears, right? But I think that it's funny because I'm actually studying a lot of psychology and neuroscience these days. And you know, we're learning about the whole process of cognitive bias and why people make certain decisions that they make, right? The thing is that you're always going to have people who have closed ears, you know, but I think that it's important to not allow, we don't want to lose people in this struggle, you know, or in this journey, I should say, you know, but we should be careful to not allow our over sort of empathy towards those who we might offend to take too much energy from the work that we need to do, you know. But to go to that question, I think another thing is that somebody else asked it too. They asked the importance of allyship. So maybe I can answer that question too. So I think for the person who asked this question about psychology, since you're here tonight, I hope that you will be a good ally and find ways, you know, because I don't have all the answers and no one should, right? I hope that you would find ways to make sure that those who you are in contact with, those who you might call family, those who you might call colleagues, understand decolonization, anti-colonization from your perspective, from your critical perspective, I hope. I think that what Sun Young was saying was really crucial in terms of this too. And maybe a last thing about this is that, you know, like, let's not forget about the roles that organizations like standing up against racial justice, for example, white organizations that say, we're going to stop being allies and we're going to be accomplices and do the work of educating those who might, quote unquote, have closed ears, you know? So I think that that's maybe the way I would answer this question. And also to answer the allyship question, that we need to focus less on, we need to focus on allies, but let's focus more on accomplices, those who are ready to put their privileges on the line for us to get the changes that we need to get. And then I'll stop there, except I wanted to just say, because of the whole philosophy question, if you haven't already read it, definitely check out Sophie Oluwele's book, Socrates and Orunmila, which is that.
Yeah, I definitely also read about her a lot. I remember when she studied, I think she wanted to study philosophy in the UK, I think. And then, yeah, and then she was also, you know, speaking about how a lot of people would ask her like, yeah, but, you know, but does philosophy exist in Africa or something like that? And then she'll be like, you know, philosophy sort of like just basically refers to about, you know, to think, and that is essentially just something that every single human being does. So if you're asking me, do Africans or whatever it is have philosophy, then you're asking me, do Africans think, which is just, you know, the answer is in the question. But yeah, I think that was also very interesting take. Thank you very much, Tunde. This question I think will be a bit more directed towards Seong-Yoon. So this person is saying Black researchers and researchers of color are engaged in the university, but they are exploited for the privilege of the Belgian colleagues. You often find yourself clashing to claim back your simple rights. Why doesn't the university monitor or require faculties to ensure proper integration and communication among international and home researchers so that the research environment becomes fair for everyone? Just a reflection, they're saying. Yeah, I think that could be interesting if she could answer that.
Yeah, that's a difficult question. It's a difficult question because you're asking why there's an injustice. And I unfortunately don't know the answer to that, but we can shift the question a little bit and question what we're going to do with the frustration that we feel when we undergo such injustices. If people of color are excluded, exploited, maltreated in the university, I really think that especially if you're in the very precarious situation, such as your PhD or your postdoc stages, before you land a permanent position, if you land one, of course, I think it could be very, very frustrating, and not only frustrating, isolating, alienating, and disillusioning. So I think it has a lot of issues. I have a pretty bad way, of coping with this, which is to embrace burnout, working out, and also you know, just basically joking about it. I wouldn't recommend this to people, but I guess one way of dealing with it is to just simply say, yeah, this is not something that I will be subject to, you know, like this is something that I will not tolerate. And once you have said that to yourself and to other people, it immediately becomes way easier to see like alternative paths. For instance, you know, you start to clap back a little bit, and then you start to look for friends who are a little bit more sympathetic and flesh and kind of select friends who are fake, and then stop hanging out with them and so on. So these like very typical and very individual and very intimate ways of resisting actually works. So I think maybe if we shift our focus there, it may be a bit more beneficial for those who are undergoing these injustices. What helps? Yeah, sorry, go on.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
So one thing that really helps me is actually just doing activism. it helps a lot. It means that you dedicate a lot of time above research or parallel research, which is why I think burnout is a thing, but it helps your sanity a lot. So I don't know, like I'm also struggling with this issue, to be honest.
Yeah, I was just going to add to that just a tiny bit that, because I appreciate what you say, and I'm understanding also that you're not saying you're not putting the responsibility on the individual. Also, I understand in that what you say, but I think that you probably said it, or Nozizwe said it about solidarity. Solidarity is key. I think that especially for Black folks and folks of color who are tired. A lot of people are just tired. I know, like people are just tired, right? And they don't have, and then, let's not forget about the intersectional possibilities that some people who are doing research, who are, doing their PhD also have, kids at home that they have to attend to, so that's why, once again, the solidarity networks are so key that, people kind of, going back to that other question I was answering, that people really kind of see and step up to be accomplices, like that you make sure that you try to work away potential injustices if you happen to be white, if you happen to be male, if you happen to be heterosexual, cis male, and if you happen to have the privilege and the time that you work towards creating solidarity networks in collaboration with folks of color so that, they don't have to carry all the weight of doing this. So I think that that's key in answering this question also.
Yeah, so I'm now gonna really, this is like just, I'm just gonna try to close the event off now. We've gone way over time, but I definitely didn't want to cut too many of the, of the panel discussion that we were having, and also definitely try to handle a couple of the questions that came in here. And I think as good as all of them have been handled. But I just wanted to just have one last round where everybody just sort of like says their closing words and any last, thoughts that they feel that maybe they haven't really had to been able to express throughout maybe the panel discussion or the keynote in the case of Tunde. But if you don't really know what to sort of like say to that, maybe I'll just put in here. Someone was, maybe just to circle back, because I feel like Nyanchama was asking that in the beginning of like, okay, so what is decolonization in essence? Because someone here was saying, a couple of my white friends were asking me, they were like, yeah, but KU Leuven is not doing anything wrong. What do you want KU Leuven to do, essentially? So that it sort of like circles back to the whole discussion of what is the decolonization thing. But that's obviously if you want to answer that. But if you have any other last thoughts that you wanted to share, then you can share those, and then we can round it off. So I'm just going to do that as well. And I also will give the chance to Nyanchama, our moderator, obviously, to also give her last thoughts as well. Yeah, maybe I'll just choose someone. So maybe Lynn.
All right. I think it's just, I'm so grateful to be part of, to have been part of this panel alongside all of you very inspirational people. And I really want to thank every one of you for the work that you do, because these kind of spaces, but also you as individuals, when I see your work out there and when I see you speaking and being vocal about all of this, it just makes me feel so safe and so hopeful to exist in the same time that you're existing. So yeah, I just want to thank everyone that was here today, and truly an inspiration, and I keep learning from all of you. So yeah, also thank you for Undivided, obviously, for all their work. So proud of you as well. Yeah, thank you. Good evening.
Yeah, maybe we can go on over to Nicola.
I also just wanted to thank everybody. All of these questions tackle so many different, you can ask them from all these different angles and all these different perspectives. And I know that definitely as a musician, one of the things that I love about music is that there is lots of opportunities to collaborate with other kinds, with all sorts of different people. But then also working with Undivided, it was a great opportunity to, be inspired by everybody who's in Undivided, especially people like Nazizwe. You guys turned me on to so many different ideas, and it was so nice to be able to get involved with activism in a real practical way that I had never done before. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Nicola, for obviously choosing to invest that time with us. We definitely appreciated that. Maybe Nyanchama?
All right. This has been an amazing day, amazing evening, amazing launch. And like I say, the manifesto is amazing, and I could add a couple of words there, because it's a journey. It's a journey that we have just embarked on. We've taken our first step, and we're going to take a lot more. It's a process of constant reflection on what is decolonization, and really defining what it is. What is a decolonial strategy? The whole process of dismantling this systemic racism, unlearning so as to relearn, and I have various suggestions about this, which I think after this, Nazizwe and I, and maybe Undivided, are going to get into conversation. But also how to launch an anti-colonial website, because it's not about an anti-racism website. It's not about an anti-discrimination website. Let's be very, very clear with our terms. It's an anti-colonial website where we put it all into action. And how do we put it all into action? By this, I mean the whole, acting as a resource center, an information warehouse, the collection of narratives, the accounts, the data mining, the links to possible ombudspeople, the safe spaces, the healing, the objectivity. It's much, much more than just a website, and it is definitely not trauma porn. So also giving information about community involvement, training resources, tools, links for students to find courses, events relating to decolonial processes, new listings about decolonial courses or pluriversal courses or multi-perspective epistemologies, indigenous knowledge systems, guidelines on sharing knowledges on decolonized terminologies, conferences, conversations, masterclasses. It's broad. This is just amazing, because you can only talk about this when you're presented with such a beautiful, beautiful stepping stone upon which you can build on. So this manifesto is just amazing. It's just it's like a diving board, and we are just going to plunge and take it. So congratulations. I applaud you. And I am very, 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 very proud, humbled, and honored to have been part of this conversation. Thank you.
No, thank you, Stella, Nyanchama, that you were willing to grace us with your presence and your knowledge this evening and during this event. I think I couldn't have asked for a better moderator who is hands-on with this work of decoloniality and decolonization and anti-coloniality for decades. So I think that in that sense, I am the one who has to be thanking you so much for gracing us with your presence this evening. Now we can maybe go on to Song-Yoon.
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to be very briefly, thank you all for building this space. I'm very happy that I got to be here and learn more, as Lean said. And I hope this conversation continues. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much for wanting to be here and willing to be here and giving us your perspective from a very specific positionality, which is obviously also very enriching for us who aren't necessarily in the same position. Now I can go on to Tunde.
Well, I don't have much else to say. I mean, you all have said everything that I guess I wanted to say, which is also that I was thinking about this earlier. I don't want to embarrass you or anything, Nozizwe, as I think about, back in the days, you know what I'm saying. I won't say it. I won't say it. But I just wanted to say that I feel very humbled, actually, and that you asked me to present tonight. And I'm very proud of you. I don't get a chance to say this. I see you, on the internet. I've been watching you on the internet, and no, really, I'm really proud of you that you have not allowed yourself to lose your fights, that you continue to push, even if you are in a very, privileged university studying law, you're pushing. And I know it's been a long road, and I'm very proud of your strength. I wanted to say that. I don't take this lightly at all. Although I wanted to ask Olivia to do this, but I don't take this very lightly at all, because I know how important this is. So I wanted to say that I'm proud of you, I'm proud of this, and I'm proud of what I read in the Undivided document. Lane, I don't know you at all, but just hearing you and hearing your strength too really gives me fire and reason to kind of continue to, collect gray hairs and continue to do this work. Yeah, so please, all of you, Nicola, Sunyon, keep pushing. And if I can help, definitely let me know. You know where to find me. And yeah, and thanks. I've already said it in the chat. Also, thanks for everybody who participated tonight. And please focus on being an accomplice. An ally is a good start, but please focus on being an accomplice. And in Chama, it was great seeing you again, and I appreciate your wisdom and kind of the dedication, because I know, part of your story too. So, so yeah, I wanted to say that. You still have my Audre Lorde book though, but we'll talk about that.
I'm just going to bring it up myself. I still have your book.
I need that book.
Book. I find it and lose it and find it and lose it. I still have your book.
Okay, fine. I got that book in San Francisco, and it's a rare copy. Okay, sorry, y'all. This is family business. We're gonna stop now.
It's almost becoming epic. I still have your book, so we are linked.
No, okay. Yeah, Tunde, like you just so that, yeah, we indeed go way back. But I think the thing is, I also definitely want to say to you, because I was, getting a bit emotional with all of the things you're saying. But you, I also haven't said this to you, but you were definitely a very big element of me finding footing here in Belgium, because as I said, I was born in Zimbabwe and I grew up there up until I was 14, and I came here when I was obviously 14, and I had to learn Dutch in an onthaalklas voor anderstalige nieuwkomers. And Urban Woorden, you're one of the co-founders of that, was a very big part of me finding my place in Belgium, when so many institutions and so many, other places who were supposed to help me were not doing it, but you were. So I think the result you see here today is partly yours as well.
All your mom, so don't even try to give me your credit. But
no, but really, it really is. So I definitely just want to be, yeah, also I wanted to thank you as well. And also everyone else, Nyan Chama, Nicola, Lane, thank you so much for sticking with us through all the bumps of of Undivided behind the scenes. And in Chongyun, thank you as well very much for agreeing to be here last minute. Thank you all to all the other people of Undivided behind the scenes who have also been with us throughout this bumpy ride to come to this end result. But thank you all so much, and everyone else who's been here. Even though we're way over time, still a lot of people who are here. Thank you very much for that. And I really, really appreciate it. And in name of Undivided, I want to say thank you. Thank you very much. So yeah, until next time. So yeah, this event will be coming online. We'll be putting it on our YouTube if you want to rewatch it or share it with other people who weren't here tonight. So yeah, thank you.